Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you here today on World Maternal Mental Health Day to talk to you about minding your mental health in the postpartum period. My name is Elaine Donnelly, and I'm the head of social work here at St. Patrick's Mental Health Services. And along with my colleagues from various disciplines, we're here to talk to you today about a range of topics related to minding your mental health in this time of adjustment and transition. We welcome you to this webinar, no matter what stage you are at your experience. We know traditionally that the postpartum period is often thought of the first 6 weeks post childbirth and those initial few weeks and months, but we know from experience that it's often much broader and longer process than that. So we want you to take the time for yourself and invite you to do that today, and hopefully you'll leave with something helpful. Some gentle housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, you can submit them via the chat function or the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we can. For anyone with accessibility requirements, you can turn on closed captions by clicking on the live transcript function in the Zoom window now. We're mindful that for lots of reasons, tuning in to hear about mental health related topics and indeed tuning into yourself can often bring up some discomfort and feelings of overwhelm. So give yourself permission to take a break if you need to, and do so in the knowledge that in the coming weeks, a recording of this webinar will be added to the St. Patrick's YouTube channel so that you can come back to it at some point if you need to, and we'll also share the presentation slides via email. Once you sign off today's webinar, you'll see a link on the screen where you can share some feedback. We'd love to hear your thoughts about how we can improve future events. So if you do have 2 minutes, please share your feedback via the link. So to kick us off, I wanted to talk a little bit about what our overall aim is for today before we get into the meat and bones of the presentation and we go through the different participants that we have speaking here today. So the overall aim for today is to highlight really how your mental health can be impacted during this period and to create an opportunity for you to reflect and to consider any needs you might have in terms of protecting and supporting your mental health. We know that everybody's experience is different, so there may be things that we cover that you will really connect to, and also things that feel less familiar to your experience. So we want to recognize that your experience is unique, while also sharing common patterns of experience from research and from our own experience in clinical work. We want to highlight that mental health difficulties can be caused by a combination of factors, and it's rarely one thing, and that your experience of mental health during this period will be shaped by a range of factors. So that could be, for example, your journey to pregnancy, any access or lack of access to support that you might have, your socioeconomic circumstances, any previous experience of mental ill health that you may or may not have. So there can be a range of things that can really impact how you might experience mental health during this time. One of the fundamental themes of this webinar is really to try and reduce shame and open up discussions that are non-judgmental around parenting and motherhood. So we want to emphasize the importance of the good enough parent. And in a lot of the work that we do here, it's emphasizing that you only need to be good enough. And that comes from research done by a famous pediatrician, Donald Winnicott. And a lot of that work emphasized how a parent just needs to be good enough. So not perfect, you won't get it right all the time, but just emphasizing that importance to give yourself grace and to be compassionate to yourself. We also want to recognize that self-care is important, and you'll hear a lot of discussion about that over the webinar, but we also want to recognize that in order to self-care, you need community care, and that it's important to ask for help and to normalize asking for help because that might be needed at this point in time. Extra help may only be needed for a temporary transition period, but it's still important to recognize that we often can't have one without the other. So in talking through what we're the overview for the webinar, we're going to start with Megan Cooley, Senior Social Worker here in the service, who's going to talk about some of the common experiences that we see. Megan will be followed by Dr. Sarah Prasad, consultant psychiatrist, who will talk about mental health disorders in the perinatal period. Then we'll hear from Dr. Sarah Louise Tartby, who's a senior clinical psychologist, and Sarah Louise is going to talk about the psychological perspective that might support help you navigate matrescence. We're going to be hearing from Claire McDermott, who's a CBT therapist and former midwife, to talk about some of the CBT approaches to supporting maternal mental health. Then we'll hear from Lydia Martin, senior occupational therapist, who will talk a bit about OT and that role in supporting your well-being during this time. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about some of the common ways that we can access support and specialist support that you might need. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Megan Cooley to kick us off.
Thanks, Elaine. Hi, everyone. You're very welcome today. So today I'm going to touch on the prevalence of perinatal mental health in Ireland today. And really what I want to raise awareness to is around matrescence. Now, sorry, Elaine, apologies. Yeah, perfect. So to raise, firstly, give a definition around perinatal mental health. So what is it? It can be a challenging time at many different stages for people, but it starts with pregnancy, antenatal, and the first postnatal year, okay? Someone that might develop a perinatal mental health disorder, they might have a new onset of it, or it might be a relapse or a reoccurrence of pre-existing mental health challenges or disorders. To describe the perinatal illness, there's many different parts to it. So it could be depression, anxiety disorders, postpartum psychosis, bipolar disorder, maternal obsessive compulsive disorder, and postpartum post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, in saying this, these are the diagnoses, okay? But we are also taking into consideration that people might feel change in mood and change in emotions throughout this period, and you might not have a formal diagnosis and that's totally okay. But a lot of studies have shared that depression and anxiety disorders appear to be most common in this particular period. And I just think it's really important to note that. The most recent study done here in Ireland was the Mind Mother study in 2022. And they record that 15 to 25% of women in Ireland are suffering with their mental health during this perinatal period. But only 6 in 10 are actually recording this or reaching out for help. Okay, and there's a number of barriers that might be touched on now today as to why that is happening. But a really important statistic there, you know, it's ultimately 1 in 5 are struggling with their mental health during this period. Okay. So in this period, you might have heard or you might not have heard matrescence. And ultimately, matrescence is about the process of becoming a mother, okay? And that starts at different times for people, okay? It could be preconception, pregnancy, birth, surrogacy, adoption, and postnatal and beyond, okay? And I always remember listening to a video around this or YouTube TED Talk, and it described the process of becoming a mother very similar to that of adolescence. And we've all come through that period of, you know, at times it can be very disorientating. You've got new roles, new needs, and new values at times. And it's trying to adjust to that while then readjusting to like your life prior to having a child, with all the responsibilities still there. So it's a huge transition that we need to be, I guess, very mindful of, that it takes time to adjust to, okay? And in the world that we are living in today, it's very busy. There's a lot of, I guess, go attitude. And we have to bear in mind that this period of becoming a mother is so incredibly unique to each person, okay? Everyone's experience of becoming that mother is different. And we need to remember that this societal expectation of, doing it all, having it all together, whatever that, these little sayings that we hear, that actually the reasons for bringing up some discussions like today is to actually realize that there is no such thing as doing it all. Okay. There's a constant influx of new information at the moment around parenting, and especially at this core period of as you become a mother in matrescence, which can then ultimately create a lot of pressure as a new mother to absorb, to understand, to put into practice straight away. And I guess the reality is that that's not possible straight away. Okay. The mental loads that we hear of, it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, and may I say it might be never ending at times. So we need to, realize that it's real, and this is something that we are facing in a period of matrescence. There's the balance of work and home life, returning to work after having a baby. And I guess the studies show a lot is that parents nowadays, a lot of the time, it's two parents working outside of the home, if there's two parents in the home. Okay. If not, it's maybe one parent, solo or single parent, that might be working outside of the home. And that creates a huge pressure and juggle that is often normalized, but it definitely can have impact on our well-being if we're not, I guess, discussing it and being aware of it. Okay. And finally, as well, in this period, there is so much discussion around childcare availability and affordability, and that in itself is often huge for new mothers in this period. So I just wanted to note that for everyone. Myself and Elaine were talking, and we thought that this would be a really important piece to raise awareness to around the experiences of motherhood, what we see versus what we don't see, and how crucial it is to share. What we see is we might see mums or parents pushing prams, going for walks with babies, maybe meeting for coffee, nurturing the baby, comforting, feeding, changing, playing. Then you might see a mum returning to work. But we also see a lot of the time the Instagram highlight reels, everything's perfect and everything's wonderful. And, that snapshot is of the day that you're seeing. It looks like everything is glorious. And we know a lot of the time that is literally a snapshot. It's a moment in time. So these are things that we might see, but the invisible and what we don't see is a lot bigger, as you can see here. The constant to-do list, the struggling to bond, a mother or a parent with sleep deprivation, birth trauma, trying to, I guess, navigate this new identity and a loss of an old identity, the physical recovery from birth, intrusive thoughts, the vulnerability in asking for help, the isolation that can come as a result of the old saying of the village being removed due to many different factors. But a lot of the time, we, in the world that we are living in today, people are not close to family and might have to travel a distance or, to see them, I guess. There's a difficulty in managing day-to-day tasks, lack of self-care, a constant judgment of themselves as, again, what Elaine said, being a good enough parent, overwhelmed, withdrawn, and often struggling to accept and be in the moment. And you often hear, sayings such as, oh, take it all in and enjoy every moment. And that can add a pressure in itself as well. And mothers can often think about that when they're not with people. So that is something that I wanted to share today, and hopefully a start to this webinar that brings attention to those pieces of what we see versus what we don't see in this period of matrescence, and how vitally important it is to remember that, it's so unique to each person.
Hi everybody, I'm Claire McDermott. I'm a CBT therapist based in Dean, Galway, and before that I was a midwife for many years. So I'm delighted to see so many people online for such an important day. Lovely to see everybody. I just wanted to mention my colleague Evelyn Mullers. She's helped me so much put together these slides, so just wanted to say thanks to Evelyn for that. So we might just move past this first slide. Sorry, no, Megan. I think some of the other speakers have spoken about prevalence and that kind of thing. So just to mention that CBT is the gold standard treatment proven to support moms through any perinatal mental health challenges. And the NICE guidelines, of course, recommend CBT as a first-line treatment for perinatal anxiety and depression. And we have some nice studies below. If you want to have a little look into that, there's some RTCs and some meta-analysis there. And of course, it's not just anxiety and depression. There's postpartum OCD that CBT can be very helpful for, and also trauma-focused CBT should there be any issues with birth trauma or, of course, past trauma. So in the next slide, we're just going to have a little look at CBT and how it may be quite specific to how we can make it specific to maternal mental health. So as always, the concept of CBT, we talk about how our thoughts impact on our feelings and how they also can impact on how we behave. And some common thoughts that might come up for moms in the perinatal period can fall into these categories. So first of all, we have self-criticism and guilt type of thoughts. So a mom might be thinking, I'm a terrible mother, other people are coping so much better than I am. And I think one of the previous speakers spoke a little bit about, what is visible in the role of motherhood versus what can be invisible. So there can be quite a lot of compare and despair type thoughts. That's what we call them in CBT. For example, oh, my sister was able to breastfeed and it seemed to go very easily for her. Why, what's wrong with me that I'm struggling a little with it? Moms might have a lot of thoughts around catastrophic type thinking. So a mom might be saying to herself, something awful is going to happen to the baby. Might be jumping to the worst possible conclusion, going straight thinking about SIDS and all the awful things that can happen. Mom might also have a lot of anxiety-driven thoughts, such as, will the baby stop breathing while they're sleeping? Or what if I drop my baby on the way downstairs? What can happen to an awful lot of moms, I find, is there can be a lot of perfectionism, a lot of, I suppose, unrealistic expectations around motherhood. So a mom might have thoughts such as, a good mom always knows what to do. There could be a lot of shoulds and musts. I should always be able to comfort my baby immediately. My baby should always be spotlessly clean. I should have him in a perfect routine 24/7, no matter what happens. And moms, of course, then can also have thoughts driven by trauma. I had a traumatic birth, I'll never recover. And of course, those OCD type thoughts. What if I hurt my baby? What if those awful intrusive thoughts mean that I want to hurt my baby? So on to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about a mother's emotional landscape. And I suppose new moms and dads can go through a whirlwind of emotions. It can range from trepidation, love, joy, excitement, and on to overwhelm. There's so much new responsibility around a new baby, so much learning, so many more tasks and jobs to complete. Huge amount of anxiety goes along with that. Sometimes, unfortunately, sadness and low mood. Irritability and anger, often caused by anxiety and caused by worry. But irritability and anger can have huge impacts on relationships. Maybe mom might be thinking her partner isn't pulling their weight, something like that going on. And of course, when everyone in the house is tired and exhausted, we can certainly all end up picking on each other a lot more than maybe we would do if we were well rested. Guilt and shame can be huge in the perinatal period. And as other speakers have noted, there can be a lot of guilt and shame around not being the perfect mother. But of course, we don't want a perfect mother. We want a good enough mother. We want, I suppose, our kids to grow up seeing that, moms and dads and grown-ups everywhere make mistakes. you know, and they come back from them and they learn from them. You know, we don't want our kids to feel they have to be perfect. You know, moms can have guilt and shame for not enjoying every second of having a baby, for maybe feeling tired and overwhelmed. And that can be particularly prominent, I think, when moms have been through a lengthy IVF process. They might have struggled with stress and hormonal changes all the way through the pregnancy. They might have dealt with pregnancy losses, might have worried their way through the entire pregnancy. And then sometimes the experience of caring for this much longed for baby and much loved baby might be very different from maybe what the mom expected it to be. Moms struggle sometimes with feelings of detachment or feeling numb. And I always find a study that was carried out in the 80s very surprising. And most people don't know about this, but I suppose we're often led to believe that the new moms feel a huge rush of love when their baby is born. But actually 40% of first-time moms and 25% of second-time moms don't actually feel this big rush of love when baby is born. And it's something a lot of moms can beat themselves up over. And I suppose it maybe isn't all that surprising that, you know, new moms are too exhausted to feel that rush of love after that lengthy labour and delivery. And midwives would often describe, I suppose, the process of going through labour and delivery. They equate it to, you know, running a marathon and it having that sort of an impact on the body. So, you know, no wonder moms are too exhausted sometimes to feel that big rush of love. And when you couple that with, you know, those sleepless nights that go on towards the end of pregnancy, the tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable, getting up to the loo 100 times at night, maybe getting up minding other children in the middle of the night, all that kind of discomfort, you know, no wonder moms can sometimes feel quite depleted after a lengthy labour. Thankfully, most moms start feeling that affection maybe a week or two following delivery, but for other moms that can take quite a few months to start coming for them, and that can lead to, you know, huge issues around shame and guilt again. And of course, the piece around grief and loss can be massive too. If a mom has, you know, experienced pregnancy loss or loss of a child in the past, of course, passing any milestones with this new baby can be particularly upsetting or particularly anxiety provoking. And as we know as well, if a mom has had a bereavement in her own family, in her own life, and especially of her own mom at an early age, you know, this can bring huge amounts of upset and, you know, and worry around the time she has the baby. So just to mention that as well. Moving on to the next slide, what do moms feel physically? So can be, of course, a lot of fatigue, a lot of exhaustion, loads of broken sleep, perhaps never getting into that, you know, never getting that full 4-hour sleep cycle that we all need so much to get that real replenishing sleep. And especially if a mom is exclusively breastfeeding, maybe she's not expressing, that often means that and it does mean all the nighttime feeds and daytime feeds fall to mom. You know, it's all on her, so that can be very exhausting, very overwhelming. Moms often have a lot of muscle tension and aches that can be caused by anxiety, can be caused by positioning as well. You know, if you're spending long periods breastfeeding a baby, that can be quite sore in the shoulders and neck if we don't mind ourselves. Moms are often still very sore from delivery for a time, whether it's, you know, normal delivery, instrumental delivery, or cesarean section. And of course, then if there's any feeding difficulties, mom's breasts can be quite sore, I suppose, between mastitis, engorgement, sore nipples, if there's tongue tie, all that kind of thing. So moms, really, their bodies are going through so much in that perinatal period. There's the lovely hot flushes, heart palpitations, nausea, of course, and again, sleep deprivation. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to look a little bit at what are some of the unhelpful things moms may do sometimes to try and cope with what's going on. So some moms worry that, you know, if they ask for help, their baby might be taken away. You know, there is a big fear around that for a lot of moms. some moms feel that by masking what's going on for them, it's a way of protecting themselves, way of protecting their baby. So can be avoidance, can be not asking for help, can be not getting out and about, not leaving the house, maybe not doing those lovely bonding activities that are so important for moms and babies, out of fear of maybe, gosh, I'll do it wrong, or, I won't enjoy it. So it can be an awful lot of avoidance if there's perinatal mental health issues. Some moms might excessively seek reassurance, so they might be constantly checking the baby, constantly questioning, am I doing this right? Am I going to make a mistake here? And I'd have definitely seen moms in the postnatal ward, not changing the baby's nappy, maybe asking the midwife to do it each time, or waiting for the dad to come in each time because they were so afraid of doing something wrong, so afraid of hurting the baby, and I suppose it's only by doing these things that we learn how to do them and become confident in them. So, avoiding them is very unhelpful. But I can see, it's so understandable as well when a mom is so anxious. Some moms withdraw. They can avoid meeting people. They can avoid engaging with friends and family. Sometimes that's driven by a fear of, what if they notice I'm not the perfect mom? What if they notice I'm struggling? She might feel too low or flat to be able to get out and about to meet people, or she might be listening to that real strong self-critic voice telling her to hide herself away. Might be compulsive behaviors, so possibly excessive cleaning, excessive sterilizing, hand washing, maybe not wanting anybody else to mind the baby or to hold the baby. As Dr. Prasad mentioned, there might be hypervigilance, that over-checking of the baby, maybe not being even able to sleep herself, no matter how exhausted she is, for fear that the baby had stopped breathing. There might be perfectionism, sticking to very, very strict rules to make sure that the baby is looked after perfectly and to very high standards. And I'd have certainly met a mother at one stage who had twins, and she always wanted the babies dressed the exact same. So she put huge pressure on herself. If one baby got a little bit dirty, a little bit of spit up or whatever, she'd run up and change the two babies. So massive pressure on herself, and massive perfectionism there. So in the next slide, we're going to look a little bit at what CBT can do to help moms cope, to help moms manage this difficult period if they're suffering from perinatal mental health problems. So the power of psychoeducation, this is massive. Normalizing those emotions, normalizing those difficult feelings and difficult experiences. The perinatal period is a real whirlwind of emotions. And as Megan was saying, it's very easy to see the moms on the outside with the lovely Instagram pages, everything looking so well and so fabulous. But oftentimes I used to even find with my own kids, when I admitted to another mom that, gosh, I'm exhausted, or my little fella isn't sleeping, or whatever else it was, they'd be very quick to come back and say, well, do you know what, I'm struggling a little bit as well, whereas I think a lot of moms can be so good and so conditioned to put on a mask, letting people think everything is going so perfectly and so well. We can also look at behavioral activation. That can be a huge part of CBT. Oftentimes, as we were saying, moms withdraw from others, withdraw from meaningful, enjoyable activities, and of course that adds to the low mood and helps to maintain it. So trying to encourage moms to get them back into maybe meeting friends, spending even 5 minutes every so often on a self-care activity, doing anything enjoyable. And sometimes that can be by herself if she's able to find somebody to mind baby, or definitely with baby in tow as well, and it's definitely nice to do a little bit of both for moms. We can look at some cognitive restructuring. So that's challenging those distorted thoughts, such as I'm a bad mother or I'm not good enough. We can also look at problem solving, such as tackling lack of sleep, looking for support. So doing things even like making sure the mom is getting towards, managing a good 4-hour sleep cycle every night with other naps in between. That could mean maybe bringing in a partner, bringing in the mother's mother, a relative, a friend, somebody maybe to mind the baby for 4 hours. let the mom head off, pop in her earplugs and her white noise and just try to sleep. It might take a good few goes for the mom to actually be able to relax and be able to sleep, but it's working on that and planning on it. And I think sleep is such a massive thing. It's something that, you know, is important to look at and plan, maybe even in the antenatal period. Maybe things like if there's breastfeeding problems, looking at problem solving that, you know, can we get a lactation consultant in to help the mom out? What can we do? Mindfulness and self-compassion. So just reminding the mom to say, you know, I'm doing my best. I'm a new mom. This is the transition. And I can be present with where I am right now, and that's okay. So the next slide, we talk a little bit about reframing and encouragement. And this is a huge part of CBT, reframing those difficult, maybe unhelpful thoughts. So saying things, you know, maybe if you're having a lot of perfectionistic or self-critical type thoughts, maybe looking and saying, gosh, well, do you know what? I'm actually doing the best I can with what I have. Good enough is good enough. It's okay to need rest. Rest can be productive too. That old saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. Mom needs to be well rested and minded and supported to enable her to mind baby. Needing help doesn't mean I'm failing, it means I'm human. So if I make a mistake, I can learn from it. And of course, that's a much more productive way of looking at things, looking at mistakes, looking at things that are less than perfect, you know, much more productive than beating ourselves up over it. You know, at least if we can learn from something that wasn't optimal, you know, it can help us move forward. And my baby needs a happy mom, not a perfect mom. And of course, the baby doesn't care whether his clothes are perfect, whether his granny is given out that he's not in a set routine or that he's not feeding enough. You know, all a baby wants is to be fed and held and to feel loved. You know, they don't care whether they have all the latest things or, you know, that's all babies want. So in our next slide, we're going to look at the ripple impact of perinatal mental health. And of course, perinatal mental health doesn't just affect the mom, it can affect the whole family. The family is a unit, and mom is such an integral part of that, that of course kids and partners and extended families are going to feel it when mom is struggling. And of course, partners can often get left out when a mom is struggling. You know, they very much get sidelined. But of course, they can be struggling with increased stress, sense of helplessness, you know, especially if the mom is somebody who is quite slow to ask for help. You know, or if she is breastfeeding, sometimes partners can feel quite left out with that. So, you know, it's so important getting partners involved and helpful and help them to support the mom caring for the baby. So help empower partners to be empowered with that. So they can do things like taking over bathing, nappy changes, cooking, laundry duties, making it a priority to take over childcare when they get in for work, but also ensuring they're getting that opportunity for their own self-care, you know, and their own time to bond with baby. So important. Perinatal mental health issues can impact other children. So kids, no matter how young they are, they'll often notice the stresses, you know, that the mom or the partner is going through. Sometimes kids end up taking on a bit more responsibility than what they'd be used to. They might feel left out, and of course it must be a massive thing for a little child to have a new addition to the family. You know, learning a new role nearly in the family for themselves. So we can't forget other children in the family. And of course, extended families, some can be very supportive. They can be fantastic, but sometimes they can be a little judgmental, a little competitive, critical, maybe over involved. And of course, we need to support moms and their partners in managing that. So just moving on again, just to talk again a little bit more about that sense of shame in the perinatal mental health period. So shame, it is common, but is often hidden. So thoughts like, I should feel this love for my child, but I can't. Shame really feeds that cycle of suffering. I'm not good enough, but I need to show I'm managing. I need to project this fabulous outward image. And that needing to do that can often stop moms getting the help they need. And of course, motherhood can be seen as a high shame role. There are so many cultural social and internal expectations, you know, don't have an epidural, don't have a cesarean, do pregnancy yoga, breast is best, even though I suppose, you know, none of us in this part of the world have really grown up with seeing our moms and our aunties and our sisters and our cousins breastfeeding, you know, and it can be quite hard to know where to go to get support around breastfeeding. It can be a huge learning curve. And of course that bit about, you know, you should always bond instantly with the baby and feel that real rush of love. So just take home messages on the final slide there. Mom's thoughts are powerful. They're not always true. So it's looking at maybe challenging some of those thoughts sometimes. Is this thought a fact, or is it an opinion? Always a really important question to ask moms, I think, when they're being very self-critical or very perfectionistic, or they're very anxious about something. How we feel, of course, has a significant impact on how we think and behave. Mom doesn't need to do this alone. There is supports available, and obviously it can be very, very difficult for a mom to reach out, but I think just knowing what supports are in place can be very helpful. Small steps really matter, whether that's getting a little bit of help, doing 5 minutes of self-care, having a nap. None of these things are going to, you know, completely solve the problem in and of themselves, but it's those small little steps and, you know, hopefully making gradual incremental changes. Hopefully that builds up over time and, you know, helps mom's mood. So CBT supports not only the mom, but the wider family. And struggling doesn't mean failing, it's just being human. And just after this slide, we have some CBT self-help kind of supports, if anybody is interested in looking into them. And just want to say thanks everybody for listening, and I'm just going to hand you over to Lydia, our OT.
Now, hi everybody, and you're very welcome to today's webinar. My name is Lydia Martin, and I work as a senior occupational therapist for St. Patrick's Mental Health Services. Before we get started, I just wanted to explain a bit about, I suppose, what occupational therapy is. Typically, when I meet people, they have heard of it through maybe, you know, an OT having visited their parents' house or whatever, but actually we work as a member of the multidisciplinary team. And I suppose occupational therapy is a profession concerned with what we do in our daily lives or our occupations and how this both affects and is affected by our health. I suppose we look at looking after ourselves, so self-care, which has been covered by Claire and the others in the presentation today. It looks at enjoying your life and being with others, so our leisure and social life, and being productive, for example, work or college activities. The main goal of OT is to support clients to participate in everyday activities that matter to them. So that's really important to us. It aims to contribute to their sense of well-being, independence, and satisfaction in daily life. So examples of work clients might do with an occupational therapist. So complete an assessment to identify their current needs and concerns, explore lifestyle changes that set related goals to support their recovery, develop skills to help them live more independently, find ways to make their daily activities easier or more enjoyable, develop a balanced and satisfying routine, and get ideas or information to help you take part in leisure or community-based activities, and identify social supports and outlets you might find helpful. So when we look at the role of OT in maternal mental health, I suppose the focus is on function, well-being, and developing coping strategies for managing this new stage in life. It's helping mothers engage in meaningful daily activities. It could be as simple as, you know, creating space each day for some downtime, you know, or spending time with their new child. It's supporting the roles such as parenting, self-care, and household management. Provide support and practical advice to mothers to care for their baby and manage life as a parent or new parent, and enhancing mother and infant bonding. I suppose it's a collaborative approach in maternal mental health. So as we work with other mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers, but we also involve kind of the social support systems that are in somebody's life, so their partners, their family, and different community resources too. So what I felt I would do today was to look at a kind of a case study, I suppose, on how occupational therapy might help somebody, you know, going through this stage. So we have a client profile here, which is Mary, is obviously using a pseudonym. She's 32, she's a teacher, she's married with a first-time mother of 3-month-old baby girl, and her diagnosis postpartum depression with anxiety. Typically, referrals will come from the psychiatrist or from the MDT. And I suppose Mary was referred to occupational therapy because from the psychiatrist due to her low mood, anxiety, difficulty bonding with her child, and poor self-care, and she had difficulties with her daily functioning. So in terms of, assessment is completed at the start of any work we would do with somebody. And I suppose for Mary, I suppose there were a few areas had came up in terms of her emotional distress. So she found herself frequently crying, feelings of overwhelm, intrusive thoughts, I suppose, which Claire had touched on there in her presentation. She was also spending long spells alone at home when her husband was at work, but he finished his paternity leave. There was a lack of engagement. So again, avoiding baby care tasks and difficulty bonding with her baby. She was neglecting her own self-care. So she, again, skipping meals, not showering, difficulty relaxing, poor sleep. And I suppose there was a lot of disrupted routines. Again, that's quite normal, I suppose, when there's a new baby in the house, I suppose. But when she was trying to juggle, kind of household kind of tasks and obviously the care and caring for her baby as well. So this really disrupted her routine. And there was a lot of social withdrawal, so avoiding family and friends as well. So we put together a treatment plan and we had weekly OT sessions. And I suppose the goals that Mary wanted to work on was kind of, I suppose she was very conscious that, she wasn't bonding with her baby girl. She wanted to focus on kind of the routine of being at home. I suppose she had been working as a teacher. So I suppose to going from working as a teacher to being at home with a baby on her own most of the day was a big disruption. And wanted to learn kind of ways and strategies to manage her relaxation or manage her stress and anxiety through relaxation, and wanted kind of, I suppose, felt very alone, but was kind of wanting to connect more with families, her friends, and kind of be open to kind of what support systems were available for her in her community. So the techniques we would use, so things like visual schedules, so that herself and her husband could kind of work on them together, goal setting, activity-based intervention, so building a routine, energy conservation, and again, I suppose, as Claire mentioned, around kind of sleep, the importance of sleep, and I suppose kind of balancing kind of your energy throughout the day so that you're able to mind yourself, but also mind the care needs of the baby as well. Sensory strategies for managing stress, and parenting support and bonding activities. So I suppose we broke these down to 3 different areas. So the first, in terms of our intervention that we would have done together, and so activity-based strategies for Mary. So what we did initially was develop a structured daily routine with small achievable goals. So I suppose we would look at, adapting the tasks, maybe adjusting the time, or maybe reducing the intensity instead of avoiding. So, instead of, trying to cook a full dinner, you might take something from the freezer, for example. So you're still cooking dinner, but you're doing it in a different way. If, instead of going out for an hour walk, some days she mightn't have the energy for that. So we would look at maybe doing a 10-minute walk or walking to the local coffee shop to grab a coffee or something for some milk or something. We introduced gradual exposure to baby care tasks with the support from her family and friends, and particularly her husband as well. And then I suppose we encourage kind of sensory-friendly relaxation methods and mindfulness practice. Again, I suppose for Mary, she, has heard a lot about kind of relaxation and mindfulness, but had never really kind of, practice it. And I suppose it is a skill. We have to teach ourselves how to do it. So I suppose allowing some time during the day to practice some relaxation and to do some mindfulness practice as well. The second area we looked at was kind of infant, I suppose in terms of the intervention, was parent-infant bonding and social supports for Mary. We looked at kind of baby massage and skin-to-skin contact to improve kind of that bonding, encourage baby wearing for closeness and mobility. And this was really important. She really enjoyed, I suppose, learning how to put on the sling and properly herself, and kind of wearing the baby close to her when she was going about her business in town or even around the house as well. And I suppose facilitating support group connections, I suppose, so providing her with, you know, the resources and the contacts for connections within the community. And I suppose we looked at kind of goal setting, you know, meeting friends for a coffee, or, you know, meeting family for some lunch, or inviting somebody over if she didn't feel like going out into the community as well. And then the third section was around kind of home and role management for Mary. I suppose we looked at kind of energy conservation techniques to manage her fatigue. Again, I suppose, as has been touched on, when you're feeding during the night and you're up checking, I suppose, you know, the good quality sleep is missing. It does have an impact on our energy levels and those feelings of fatigue throughout the day. So again, I suppose that was really important for Mary to balance activity with rest. And then obviously also when the child was kind of napping, to try and use that time for her to practice some relaxation and to rest her own body as well. And we looked at kind of simplified meal preparation, you know, I suppose outsourcing some of it to some of her family and friends, and then kind of, I suppose, cleaning as well the house and trying to keep on top of different household kind of tasks that she wanted to do as well. So I suppose when we looked at, I suppose, the outcomes and progress around that, so I suppose for Mary it was around kind of reduced anxiety and managing her stress better by utilizing kind of relaxation techniques. She was more engaged in daily self-care, so showering, dressing, eating more regularly, allowing the time when the baby was napping to rest her own body as well at the same time. Increased bonding with baby, so enjoying playtime and the caregiving role. Resumed kind of social activities with friends and joined a weekly parent, baby and toddler group. So again, that was really important for her to, I suppose, feel connected to other women who in her area that were, you know, at the same stage as well. So that was really important. And I suppose we kind of set goals around, I suppose, kind of leading up to that, you know, I suppose, you know, making contact, you know, arriving a little bit earlier so that she's not feeling stressed or flustered, having some, you know, equipment with her for the baby if they need her, some toys, and some, you know, nappies and all of that as well. And then we looked at kind of managed household responsibilities more effectively, I suppose, kind of, you know, dividing some of the labor with her husband a bit more, you know, asking her parents who lived reasonably close to come in and help her with some of those kind of activities at home as well. And I suppose, you know, this was already touched on by Dr. Prasad earlier on, but I suppose in terms of the kind of key takeaways, you know, the Royal College of Psychiatrists recommends several steps you can take to mind your mental health during the perinatal period. These include common mental well-being approaches such as eating a healthy, balanced diet, finding time to do something enjoyable or relaxing each week, practicing mindfulness or meditation, getting regular sleep, discussing any worries you might have with your family, your GP, or your midwife. And there's some more specific suggestions, making a well-being plan to include support you might need during and after your birth. And the nice guidelines have a few that they support, which you can get online. And reducing demanding daily tasks like housework or shopping, and letting family and friends help with these activities. Okay, so that is my part there. If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat as well. Thank you.
So hello everyone, my name is Sarah Louise. I'm a psychologist here in St. Pat's, and today I'll be speaking about how understanding and supporting your maternal mental health and matrescence from a psychological perspective can be helpful. So I'm hoping that what we cover here can normalise and help you make sense of how you're thinking and feeling and coping and needing during this time, and to speak to some of the unique yet normal experiences and responses to matrescence, and how managing your mental health with context and compassion is an essential part of matrescence. So when my colleagues and I were thinking about what is important, I might just go back to the last slide, if that's okay. Thank you. Thinking about what's an important message that we wanted to impart today, we knew that we wanted to communicate that all that happens in matrescence and motherhood makes sense, and your mental health is definitely impacted by this transition and should be considered and tended to during this time. So to help with that task of making sense as to why your mental health might be impacted, I'm going to speak to a few of these topics listed that are relevant to the interweave of matrescence and maternal mental health. And hopefully you'll come to understand how understandable it is to have mental health needs during this time. So I'll just go to the next slide, please. So my colleagues have spoken about a range of psychological, emotional and relational changes that go hand in hand with matrescence and how we view it as a period of development, just like many other stages of life. And we want to acknowledge that the transition to motherhood and occupying this role is full of challenges and opportunities as you go through changes in your roles, your daily tasks, your competencies, your self-concept, your relationships, your values and your needs. And there's a huge amount of expansion, there's growth, there's self-discovery, and there's also loss and reconciliation of old and new versions of yourself and your life. And it's so important to acknowledge that life has changed, and we don't want to dismiss that motherhood does impact your sense of who you are and what you're about. So it's completely normal to miss aspects of your old life, maybe a daily life where you felt pretty assured that you'd be able to get through the day without any major risks or worries, that you felt competent in the things you were doing and that you had to cope with, that you had flexibility to respond to your needs, to take a break, to do what you wanted, to this new version of everyday life where you're constantly learning on the job, which is full-time, attuning and responding to a baby with unique temperament and nervous system and needs, while recovering yourself and trying to figure out how you want to parent, what you want to be in terms of relationships with family, friends, in your career, hobbies, and how you're going to take care of yourself. And you're probably finding out about new parts of yourself that you didn't even know existed until now, and maybe even reevaluating what you want to prioritize in life at the moment or what you value. So there's a lot of change happening and there's a lot to consider, and it really does take grace and time to figure it all out. And there can be threats to how you view yourself, which can feel really unsettling. So there are many examples of this, but just one today might be, if you viewed yourself and you really valued that kind of sense of control and feeling competent, that you complete things to a high standard, then the unpredictability and messiness and trial and error and kind of lack of feedback that comes with motherhood can really trigger feelings of anxiety, of shame, thoughts of failure or inferiority. And naturally, as humans, we want to move away from what doesn't feel so good, and we want to feel safer. So you might begin to cope with those difficult feelings by striving in the role of motherhood, which can end up being kind of unhelpful to how we take care of ourselves as well and how we navigate all the change. So matrescence can have you questioning your sense of self. Why am I not holding it together like I usually do? Why do I feel a bit lost? I've wanted this for so long. I feel a bit burnt out. And these can be really threatening thoughts and feelings, and it may be helpful to have space to explore that with a therapist or a trusted friend or in a group of other mums who get it. And we really do want to think as well about how you support a positive shift in your identity at this time. So it really is about slowing down and being able to acknowledge what's coming up for you in terms of identity, having a realistic and flexible expectation of yourself as you navigate this time. Acceptance that finding your feet in motherhood is not a linear process, and then beginning to move towards what you value in your life at this moment in time. And that might be within your role as a mother, but it also might be that you want fulfillment outside of that role. So just always remembering that you're a whole human with multiple valid parts and needs. We'll just go to the next slide, please. So we've talked a little bit about this already today, but often society portrays matrescence as a completely joyful time, but we know that it involves experiences that evoke a range of emotions. There's worry, sadness, grief, boredom, doubt, and they coexist alongside love, gratitude, happiness, pride. And it's completely normal and expected to be feeling a variety of ways as you navigate motherhood. It's normal for emotions to change daily, moment to moment. And you may even have feelings about what you're feeling. So maybe feeling guilty about having feelings of feeling resentful. And then not only are you feeling all of the feelings, the full gamut of emotions, you're experiencing those emotions through the fog of your brain rewiring to incorporate baby, of learning new skills, having more duties, less sleep, more demands on you. So understandably, it may feel more intense than usual. And this is the context that we'd love for you to hold in mind, that how could it be any other way than mixed if you're going through so many different things? It makes sense that you wouldn't be feeling joyful all the time. So we really encourage you to try not to judge or shame yourself for your emotions. This can make things so much more overwhelming. And remembering that you're human, that your feelings don't mean that you don't care or love or that you're not a good parent, while also holding that it can be so helpful to have a space with a caring loved one or a therapist to really speak through your emotions and your needs around them. And often a listening ear really does help things ease off a little bit. But other times you really need tools to help us move in and out of emotions and to feel confident in responding to them. So therapists and services can support you with that. So just the next slide, please. So another piece that can impact your mental health is physical recovery. So your body is going through huge physical changes postpartum. And if you're in pain, if you're sleep deprived, if you're not nourished, this can understandably leave you more vulnerable to your emotions and tricky minds and how resourced you feel to cope with the demands that are on you. So please don't underestimate the importance of support to get enough sleep, to be nourished, to rest, and be mindful of any messages to bounce back or be able to manage it all with ease. Your hormones and neurobiology are also shifting at the moment, and your body does this to help you to respond to baby's needs. But this can be really, really difficult to go through. And we also want to acknowledge birth trauma, which is really common, unfortunately. And if you've had a traumatic birth and if you're suffering with distressing memories or strong emotions about the experience, you may benefit from additional support from healthcare professionals for the physical or psychological impact of this. And we also want to say that what defines a traumatic birth is what's distressing for you. It's not defined by specific injuries or experiences decided on by other people. And often the birth process can be traumatic if you felt like you had little choice or little control in the process. So please do get support with it. And another aspect that can impact maternal mental health is body image. So your body is going through massive changes during pregnancy and postpartum, and it's really common for body dissatisfaction to impact on mood postpartum. So next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit about your own relationship to parenting and childhood. So when you become a parent, everything you know about the role of mother, father, parent is activated. So your own experience of being parented might come to the fore, what you valued about your parents, your childhood, and what you want to emulate, and also what was painful and what you want to be different. All of this may be on your mind. So you might notice that you're triggered by how your own story shows up in how you step into building your own family. And there can be grief, there can be memories, a range of feelings about what happened or didn't happen in your relationship with your caregivers and in your childhood. And often seeing your parents or not seeing them with your baby, or having support or not having support, may bring up a huge amount of emotions and grief as well. And as you bring your child into the world and you become part of its safety and protection system, it's really normal for experiences of past trauma to be with you. So if this is the case for you, really do go gently with yourself, and trauma-informed supports will be a really important piece for you to hold at this time. Your expectations and beliefs about how you need to be as a mother, we've talked about this already, are shaped by society and social media about what they say is the right way to mother, the perfect way. But we know that there's absolutely no way to be a perfect mother. But there are a million ways to be a good one, and finding what's right for you is really important to adjusting to this role. And finally, how you've imagined this time in your life to be and how you've imagined you would be and feel in this role may come into conflict with how you move through this in real time. So being open to how it is for you, being empathetic towards any conflict, and that might help ease some of the threatening feelings and pressures that you're going through. So next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit about coping and self-care during this period. And self-care involves intentionally and proactively attuning to and taking care of your needs. And I imagine there are lots of people who've joined us today who are highly motivated to take care of others and maybe put baby and other people first before their own needs. And often that feels like the most natural thing to do and can be expected of mothers. And we deeply understand that motivation. but it often has a cost and can leave mothers depleted, and their well-being and mental health can suffer. So taking some time to really think about intentionally caring for yourself postnatally is so important when you do have this little person depending on you and you are managing so much. So considering what you may have done to mind yourself in the past and to cope in the past, that may not be very accessible right now. So if you loved having a routine, you could get some extra sleep, a clean house, time with friends, exercising, or just some downtime. If they were things that helped you in the past to feel a little bit more settled in times of uncertainty or to help you with challenge, they might not be so accessible right now, especially in the early days. And it won't always be that way, but it is important to acknowledge it because it can feel like you might never get back to yourself and your usual way of coping might never return. So we don't want you to feel too lost or unsteady. And what you need now to take care of yourself and navigate this adjustment might be different to what you have needed in the past. So you may have always been the type of person who preferred to manage challenges on your own, who might be more practical than emotional or vice versa. But what we know is that mothers need to be minded too, that babies take a village, and that we can't know everything about mothering, that you've no control over how baby feeds or sleeps, and that the huge mental load that comes with parenting is difficult to navigate. And we also know that we're social animals, so our brains and nervous systems are built to connect with others rather than be alone in processes that activate our threat system. So you may need loved ones and professionals to row in and help you out here. You might need practical help, support to learn new skills. You might need help to get a bit of extra time to get your needs met. And you might need someone to listen and just appreciate what you're moving through. So another way of thinking about coping and self-care is to think about ways we access our sense of drive and soothe to help us balance stress and threat. So our drive system is our internal sense of moving towards what resources us. It gives us a sense of achievement, a sense of purpose. It's kind of that feeling of something that makes us tick. So it might be as simple at the moment as having a shower, getting out of bed and putting on some nice clothes, having a nice coffee, getting a meal you really enjoy, meeting a friend, watching something on Netflix that you really enjoy. Your soothe system, and on the other hand, is our internal system for rest and care. And when we access our soothe system, we feel a little bit calmer, a little bit more able to manage things and steadier in ourselves, and we feel cared for. So soothing might look like a hug from your partner, a good laugh with a friend, or a voice note about what they're up to. Taking a few deep breaths and giving yourself some reassuring self-talk. And taking some time to get a sense of what your drive and soothe resources are at the moment can really nourish you and just help you get through those difficult moments. And finally, just a word on co-regulation. So co-regulation is where one person attunes to and responds with care and consideration to the emotions and nervous system needs of another. And we often think about co-regulation when it comes to parents supporting their children. So if a child is upset, a parent is supporting them to understand why they're upset, to regulate and to get their needs met. But you will be constantly offering your little one co-regulation. So you will really benefit from another adult supporting you to feel regulated. So holding you in mind, supporting you with your emotions and your needs. So in terms of coping and self-care, thinking about who can support you to feel seen and soothed, and the coping and self-care practices that will work for you now to help you meet your needs is really important in supporting your mental health at the moment. So I might just skip to the next one, please. Next slide. So one of the main barriers to mums seeking support for maternal mental health is stigma, unfortunately. And there is so much shame and guilt and fear and judgment attached to mothering. And it has a really long history that we hope, today is starting to change that a little bit. And it's really heartbreaking that there have been messages and actions that have communicated that if you have difficulty coping or if you seek support for mental health in this period, it insinuates that a person is a bad mother or not good enough or not grateful enough. And these messages have been so powerful and prevented women from being supported with valid needs. So we want to be really clear when we say that struggling with your mental health in any part of matrescence is not your fault or your choosing. It indicates that you are human and that you have needs. that it's a signal for understanding, for care, and for support. And it is hugely compassionate and courageous to support your needs at this time, and it will benefit you and your baby. So just the next slide, please. So we often talk about compassion and offering yourself compassion, but what compassion is noticing and engaging with your suffering and a commitment to alleviating it and preventing future suffering. So it requires wisdom to know that much of what you're going through is not your choosing or your fault. And yet we have to take responsibility for your quality of life and to demonstrate a caring commitment to meeting your needs. So I've just outlined kind of a brief way to respond to your experience from a compassionate perspective. And it involves noticing what's happening for you, integrating the context of your stress, offering yourself empathy and recognizing your needs in this moment, and then really thinking about what will be helpful to you in alleviating the suffering you're going through, and moving towards this with action and commitment. And every time you pause and notice what's happening for you and make a choice to respond to your threat system with compassion, it shifts how you handle stress. It shifts how you relate to yourself and how you cope with difficult experiences. And by doing it, you're constantly broadening your window of tolerance, feeling safer in difficult moments, feeling more resourced to make choices that are in your best interests. So it might seem like a futile exercise in the grand scheme of things, of everything you're going through at the moment. But by repeating this over and over again, by being with yourself in this way, in a compassionate way, this is neuroplasticity in real time. So you're building a more helpful way of coping that will eventually feel more natural to you. So I really hope that this is just some food for thought that helps you move towards understanding how matrescence and mental health, they really do go hand in hand, and seeking support and being supported through this life transition with care and compassion is so important. And I've just included another example, but we won't maybe have time to go to that today, but it'll be on the slides. So I'll just pass you back to my colleagues and just thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sarah Louise, and thanks to everyone so far for such valuable presentations. We're coming to the end of today's webinar, but before we do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about just getting help and support, because that's an important element of today, and an important message for you to leave with. So I suppose we've talked a good bit already throughout this afternoon about how this is a time of big change on all fronts. And we're all interconnected as humans, so a change in one part of the system will have knock-on effects for other parts of the system, and that will impact different people in different ways and different relationships in different ways. And all the research would tell us that having access to effective early support is really important for our well-being, and yet all the research also tells us it can be very hard for people to get the support that they need. So there's some challenges and barriers in the way for us. And I suppose some of those, and I won't talk in too much detail about that, but I suppose some of the things that we see would be that lack of support that's available. So the way society is structured now at the moment, it doesn't lend itself to having that village and having that support around you. So whether that be the housing crisis, whether that be working arrangements, very often we're living away from family. We don't have a family of origin close to us. We might be living, in a different country, for example. So there is, the support that we have access to has reduced on a very practical, basic level. We also see a lot of people feel unsure about what's normal. So, for example, the physical recovery from birth, people might not know what to expect or what's normal, and the difference between what's normal and what's common. So people might be enduring a lot of symptoms or struggles and might not know that there's help available or that they can seek help, or it's not normal for them to be experiencing that within the postpartum period. Some people just might feel unsure about what they might need because you might feel overwhelmed, or there's such a high level of volume of information that's thrown at people, so it can be difficult to specify exactly what you might need or what might help you. And as Sarah Louise mentioned, stigma and shame and that fear of being judged is a really present barrier for people in reaching out and getting the help they might need. We also know that in the postpartum period, there can be lots of changes in relationships and availability of existing support. So, for example, you might be parenting alone. You might be the first person in your friendship group to have a baby, for example, and that might infer different kind of changes in your access to social supports. We also know, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, that it is a time of extra challenge in relationships as you move from being a partner, if you're parenting with somebody else, to being a co-parent. Then it can often be the issue of people struggling to find a tribe, as it's described, or a place of acceptance, or struggling to connect with others, maybe for, could be lots of reasons for that. But there can be a lot of pressure in social media and in society to find that kind of tribe. And often that just doesn't happen for people at certain times during their journey. And again, we want to emphasize that while it's really important that we look after our own well-being and we take responsibility for that, sometimes, we also need help from others to step in and help us look after ourselves as well. So this is a really important time for you to think about what you might need, because that could vary from person to person, and it can be useful to take the time and have a think about, what do I need in this moment? What's going to help resource me to be, the best version I can be right now, given everything that might be going on? What would be different if I felt more supported day to day? What would be different for me? And what sort of support might help me feel more resourced? So we know that can be very different for different people. So for some people, filling their cup might mean just taking some time out alone. For some people, it might be going back to bed. Some people, if your nervous system is very active, might struggle to engage in like restful type activities. Some people might want to spend time with their family or to spend time with their child without having the burden of household tasks, for example. Or you might need to connect with old friends. There's a vast range of things that people can do for themselves to find, that they may find supportive. And if there's anything thus far you've found helpful or supportive, you might share in the chat box, and that could a broad range of things, whether that's an activity, a resource, a social media page. We'd love for you to share that with other participants here, so that others may find useful strategies to get support. So the different kinds of support that might be available. So if we're talking about your immediate circle, it might be your partner or your spouse. Then you might be talking about family or close friends, extending out into extended family, friendships, and then community groups and peer support networks. Support's available to your primary care health service, so your GP, your PHN, maybe your midwife. And then you have the more specialist support, such as the specialist perinatal mental health service. So this is a good time for you to consider, is there a mother and baby group near me? Is there baby massage? Think of activities that you might like to do that maybe interest you pre-baby, and if there might be any kind of parent-baby options available to you. The library can be really a good place to start. I suppose in thinking about your more closer immediate relationships, it's useful to think about what support you might need from those around you. And people's capacity to support you might be varied. Some people are really good at practical support. So some people can, drop down a meal for the freezer. Other people might be more able to sit and have a chat and provide more validating type support. Some people, might be available to give help and advice. So it really depends on what you might need, and having a think about that, because everybody's situation is different and relationships can often change in this period. So maybe for some people, for example, they might have their mother with them, and that kind of there might be a high level of support that a person might find intrusive, vice versa. Somebody might feel like they wanted more support from their own family of origin. So it really depends on what works for you. But so it is useful to take the time and consider what you might need, and to prepare in advance any conversations you might want to have where you're asking for help. To use statements that make what you think and feel as clear as possible. So I would like your help if you could come over and fill the dishwasher while I go down for a nap, for example. We always advocate that you use I statements, so saying, I'd really like if you could, rather than you should do this or you should do that, because we know that that's going to create a more defensive response in those around us. It's really important that we're mindful of our timing, and accurate timing is important because we know due to sleep deprivation, emotions can run high. You might be experiencing a high degree of intense emotions or be more emotionally vulnerable. So being mindful of your timing when having these conversations, and your ability maybe to take on any feedback or deal with any discomfort that can come up from asking for help. And to be mindful of your longer term goals within that relationship. In terms of intimate relationships, it's important to recognize that this is a season that's often referred to as the roommate phase. And if you are co-parenting with somebody together, this is probably the first time you've had to do this. So talking about this and recognizing that can be really important. Even just a simple acknowledgement that you haven't done this before and that you're encountering together a big transition from going from partners to parents, because we know that this can be quite a lonely time and a time of often disconnection due to the numerous practical factors that people are dealing with, such as, much higher intensity of tasks that have to be done throughout the day, not on very little sleep sometimes, without the support you might need. So we know there's a couple of common stress points within relationships, such as communication, so not feeling able to openly communicate. Stress around finances can often come up, particularly it might be the first time that you've had to share financial burdens with each other, financial responsibilities, and that can often reflect deeper insecurities or feelings of vulnerability. Intimacy can be a big factor that comes up, and that can often take a lot of time and patience to come back to maybe where you've been before. Division of labor, parenting styles, family of origin, these are all things that we encourage people to have open conversations around, and to think about how you will share decisions and responsibilities for your baby's care, because often there's unsaid expectations and assumptions about who will do what in terms of the mental load and the invisible load of parenting tasks. So it's really important that we communicate openly about expectations regarding child care. For example, I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately. I'm carrying a lot on my own. I know we're both tired, but I really need help managing X, Y, or Z. Could we sit down and figure out a way that we could split things a bit more? We often see a lot of advice around having date nights or having time together, and that's really important. And also it's really important to recognise that depending on your support network or your access to finances, there might be limited opportunities for that. So thinking about smaller ways that you might be able to stay connected throughout the week, for example, watching a series together, having, a couple of hours without phones, trying to do a joint activity or have a date night at home might be a useful place to start. More than anything, I suppose it's really important that we normalise asking for help. You won't always need extra help, but this is an extra challenging period, and that help at this time can really make things that bit easier and that bit more manageable. There may also be occasions where you might need access to specialist support. So we know that research would tell us that abuse and violence in relationships can often escalate in the perinatal period, or even begin in this period. So if you have any worries or concerns about your relationships, it's really important that you talk that out with a trusted family member or friend, and that you know that there's specialist help available if you feel safe to do that. So those details are included there. It's also important to note that if you need extra help or you're worried about your mental health, so some of the things that we've talked about today, so feeling overwhelmed and that's persisting, really struggling with the bond, or having frequent worries or fears about your body images, some of the symptoms that are described there, to know that you can access specialist perinatal mental health services via your GP or your maternity services up to a year after you've had your baby. So just to know that support is there. We've also included some other kind of resources that might be of help to you. So these are books, social media pages, apps. The Motherhood Programme is a really great resource that people can look to online. Similarly, the Maternal Mental Health Alliance, and there's a perinatal self-care programme developed by the Midwest Areas and Recovery College. Different books that people have recommended. There's the MoCo app, which is a really fantastic resource that we would highly recommend, and different social media pages that might be helpful to people. So we'd like to encourage you to seek support if you feel you need it, and we'd like to thank you for joining us today. And hopefully you found this helpful and useful. And as we said, the recording of the webinar will be available online in the coming weeks at the St. Patrick's YouTube website. So you'll see a link up to offer us some feedback, and we'd really welcome any feedback that you'd like to share. Thank you all for joining us today.